Russia's war against Ukraine has escalated significantly this year, but it did not start in February last year or even in 2014. Its roots are far deeper and more malign than just territorial ambitions. Today, I'm exploring how tyranny that is left unchallenged will continue to fester and project aggression towards its neighbours. Russia's attempts to dominate Ukraine have deep roots in its Soviet and imperialist past, and are very much a result of the failure to acknowledge the crimes of its totalitarian history. Welcome to Silicon Curtain Podcast. Please like and subscribe if you like the content we produce. It will really help to increase the popularity of our content and our fantastic guests in YouTube. Also, please consider supporting us through Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee. And of course, we also list a number of Ukrainian charities, validated charities that are doing incredible work. Olha Honchar is CEO of the Museum Crisis Center initiative, which arose in the first days of the Russian war against Ukraine. She's co-founder of the NGO New Museum and the charitable organization Cultural Heritage Fund of Ukraine. Olha is a culturologist, anti-crisis manager and director of the Memorial Museum of Totalitarian Regimes called Territory of Terror in Lviv. She is also an internationally recognized curator of interdisciplinary projects in the field of historical memory and trauma. Olha, welcome to the channel.
Hello.
Now, I've been reading some extraordinary interviews that you've done with especially the art press, but also mainstream media publications. And there's a great interest, isn't there, in the impact of the war on Ukraine's culture, but also its heritage and museums. Now, this must be an extraordinary time for you as well as one of the leading museum curators in Ukraine.
Yes, we have a lot of interview last year about museum and culture heritage, but now this topic I think not popular in media, and it's not okay. So it's why it's very important to continue and talk about this, because war in Ukraine not over, and Russia continue destroying Ukrainian museums, archive, library, and so on in all Ukrainian territory, and a lot of people who work in museum community lost their job or evacuated outside of Ukraine. So yes, now situation not okay. So it's very important to show this culture genocide which Russia continue to do in Ukraine, and talking that museum under attack.
Because, of course, this isn't just a war about territory, is it? It has a genocidal characteristic. Russia has systematically tried to destroy unique Ukrainian culture. We think particularly of the House Museum in Kakhovka, which was destroyed with beautiful murals and paintings on the walls. We think of various other museums to philosophers and artists. It seems at times they have been deliberately targeted, not just sort of collateral damage, but it's the actual intent to fire missiles at cultural institutions. Does that surprise you? I mean, did the invasion itself surprise you? And does the genocidal characteristic of Russia's invasion surprise you or not?
I think all this change in my life after 24 February surprised me, because of course we, like people from museum field and historical field, read a lot of books about war and so on, but when war comes to your real life, it's very stressful and dangerous. So of course, before 24 February, I read all instruction, algorithm, methodologic materials from international perspective, from Ukrainian, how to save heritage when war come to a country. But in practice, this methodology not work. So now every day in Ukraine, we must create something new strategy to survive, like people, like professional, and of course like museum workers. So also yes, of course we know that Russia destroying people from culture sector from all history perspective. A lot of Ukrainian artists, writers was destroyed and killed, and repression. But when war come to your life, not in theory, like in practice, it's very stressful. And yes, it. I don't know what that we can name this, like surprise, but I don't know. In Ukraine, maybe we every day have something surprise, because every day we have attack from air, so you never know what the next building, museum, or human life will be destroyed, unfortunately.
And you reacted very quickly to create the Museum Crisis Center. The inspiration is obvious, but I'll ask anyway, what inspired you? But I think most surprising is how quickly you're able to set that up, and how quickly you're able to mobilize people. Did you find that people were very, very willing to sort of help you make that happen in the early days of the war?
I think in general, Ukrainian philosophy, we're very fast. Maybe you have a lot of friends from Ukraine, and you see that we're very fast, we very expressive emotions. So, and when we want to do something, we in general we don't have strategy. We must think, we must write plan, and so on and so on. No, Ukrainian. Okay, we want to do something. Let's do. So it's about Ukrainian philosophy. Yes, how we feel in the world and what we do. So after 24 February, of course, the first hours of war, my team and I was in Museum Territorial of Terror, and we do work to protect collection, funds, buildings, and so on. But this first week, a lot of people come to Lviv, and we also manage helping people, and also a lot of international foundations, activists, volunteers, and so on start to calling museum leaders who was in Lviv and ask about situation, because in general a lot of my colleagues from Kyiv, Kharkiv, Chernihiv, and other region who was in attack first don't have time and possibility to have this phone conversation, because they do emergency work to save their life and museum. And a lot of people from outside call me and ask, what's the situation, and how we can help you and your colleagues from Donetsk and Lugansk region, and ask me if I have these contacts. Yes, and I have a lot of contacts, because in my work we have a lot of projects inside of Ukraine, and of course I have these contacts, and I call to my friends in Lugansk region. My friend was in occupation in this time, because I called to Starobirsk, and Starobirsk was occupation in first time of war. So I'm asked how we can help you and colleagues in Lugansk region. And after this, it was first week of war. I write a post in Facebook. It was 3 March, and I'm because in Ukraine we also very Facebook oriented, and I'm asked my friend, okay, a lot of people start evacuation, but how we can help people from culture sector, from museum sector, who stay in Ukraine with their museum, with their collection, maybe some foundation, and so on and so on. And a lot of my partners from all project write me personal that Ola, we don't have time to waiting that some foundations start working. We must do this work together. And after this 3 March Facebook post, we created Museum Crisis Center Initiative. And from this period to now, we do this work and organize support for museum workers who stay in Ukraine and continue their museum work.
And does this include, obviously, protecting some works like sculptures with sandbags? Does it also include putting works of art into a secure place? I remember in the Second World War, a lot of works of art in Britain were put into mines. They put them deep underground to escape the bombing. So have some of these protective measures been adopted in Ukraine?
It's very difficult questions because now in Ukraine we understand that we don't have safe place and we can be sure that place where you hide something it's safe in all protocol. Yes, so in general, this work of protection every director and museum team do in their museum, in their territory by themselves. So sometimes they evacuated collection, but my initiative focus on financial support for people who stay in Ukraine. So we share some scholarships, I don't know, maybe some financial support that people can spend or for emergency work. Sometimes in the first time of war, museum director call and say that we stay in occupation and we need some extra money for packet materials. So please send and we do some job in this museum. Or they call and say that we start evacuated museum collection, but we don't have money for gas. So please help. Sometimes they also stay in their danger territory and they need food, medical support, water, and need extra money because it's very expensive in Ukraine now. So we also help with this. And sometimes it's story that people want to evacuate it from occupied territory and they need money for this evacuation, for personal evacuation, because people who work in culture sector, and if they this territory stay to be occupied, it's very dangerous for these people, because Russia destroying not only physically building, artifacts, sculpture, and so on, they also destroyed people physically. So we do this work to fundraising money, share people for money who do job on their museum, in their place. But also when we talk about protection, a lot of foundation have a lot of contacts from Ukraine, from me, because sometimes the foundation have a lot of packet materials, box, special thing for protection fund collection, and they need a contact from Ukraine, from museum, and they want to work personally. And my job is find my colleagues and share these contacts to big foundation, and they also continue and work. And in this case, yes, we have a lot of story about support when a lot of materials come to this museum. So it's also communication work and work like mediator, and also we have very big networking in Ukraine, and when somebody good guys or good foundation come and say that we want to help, please connect with the people who need this support, we also do this job.
And of course, you're not just documenting and protecting works of art and getting them to safety. Part of the job, unfortunately, must be documenting the works of art that have been lost, because we know that Russia has purposefully targeted museums, tried to destroy them with missiles, cultural centers, as well as schools and hospitals. But in occupied territories, they have also been looting museums and taking those artifacts back to Russia. So as part of the job you and your colleagues are doing is documenting the lost artifacts, potentially for future recovery and prosecution of Russia.
Yes, also my colleagues from Kherson Museum, Kherson Art Museum, start this job with Ukrainian international lawyers. And also when some organization ask me contact, I'm also connect this museum and this organization. But when we talk about saving heritage, we also have case when Lugansk Regional Museum was evacuated to Lviv, and now we work together in Museum Territorial of Terror. So we hosting museum from Lugansk region, and we also hosting a very big private collection of contemporary Ukrainian art in Museum Territory of Terror. So we also do this job of protection, but it's not general focus, because people is a general focus. And also when a lot of journalists and organization, they also want to contact with the museum who work in Kherson also and in other region, we also connect, and this information go outside. When we talk about documentation, we do this work. We have a project Wounded Culture, and we do VR documentation of destroying Ukrainian museum. So it's also the general idea is documenting this destroyed museum and share international community how look real situation and real life. So we have documentation from Ohtyrka Museum is Sumy region, and now we start documentation in Kherson region. And also we create oral history interview with director of all Ukrainian museum, because it's very important to documentation how to be museum work in a war, and also in Russia war, because Russia war for me it's like face of Russia war. It's yes, some museum Russia destroyed, some museum Russia stolen, but in occupied territory Russia also reorganized museum to propaganda center. And in Lugansk region, we also see that a lot of museums start to be this center of propaganda. And I think we must research in other wars that Russia manage in other country, other territory, and I think it's the same situation. So a lot of work, and but of course I'm staying in Lviv and I can do more work. But my colleagues who in frontline and occupied territory, it's very dangerous to do something documentation and some photograph protocols about what Russia do.
And this must be especially challenging in an environment of aggressive and pervasive Russian propaganda narratives. What do you think is the role of art and expressing Ukrainian identity, national identity in art, to counter Russian propaganda, which essentially says there is no Ukraine, there's no Ukrainian language, there's no real identity, it's only a subset of, the Russian imperial identity.
Yes, it's. I think if you want to understand war in Ukraine, this Putin speech before 24 February, it's very important to sometimes again and again listen this speech, because yes, Putin said that Ukraine don't have rules to be country, don't have a chance to have identity. And when we talk about culture, it's very interesting because after 24 February, a lot of Ukrainian curators, activists, and institutions do this international work and informational work to explain that a lot of paintings, literature, and artists which in world history of art named by Russia, in general, it's Ukrainian. Because Russia stolen a lot of artists and named that it's Russia artist, and we do this work in international level to back history of art of Ukraine to Ukraine. But also, I think, for my feeling, in the international community, it's not a problem that a lot of Ukrainian artists long period named like Russia artists. Yes, because a long of time Ukraine was occupied by the Russian Empire, and maybe people forgot the true history. But and now it's war also. We're fighting for true history. We back history to Ukraine and share this Ukrainian history to the world. And of course, it's why Ukrainian museum under attack, because when you don't have physical artifacts and facts, you can do this propaganda and manipulations. And yes, but a lot of my friends now traveling, and when they see some paintings and museum, and these artists writing by Russia, they also start writing to these museum curators. And sometimes it's very, very stressful, long conversation. But step by step, we have this situation that a lot of international museums change this explication and write through and through information and facts, not Russia propaganda. But also I understand that Russia propaganda have a lot of power. So it can be changed like 1-2 years. It worked for a long time.
That's right. I get a really strong impression of how tough that can be. I spoke to Marta Tratsiuk, and also had a great interview with Oksana Semenyk, who's had some success in getting collections relabeled in the Smithsonian in particular. I think the London museums were a little faster than others in tackling the relabeling, but it's a real challenge, isn't it? And there's another challenge too, which of course is the Russification of Ukraine, the erasure of identity and language was strongest in the East, those territories that were industrialized, where a lot of Russian colonists were imported from the 19th century onwards, and where really strong efforts were made to wipe out Ukrainian language and force people to forget their Ukrainian ancestors and roots. Is it a challenge also culturally to try and sort of navigate some of the differences between the East and the West, or regional identities? Or are people now coming together, more? What are the challenges, right across the territory of Ukraine, and the potential differences you've got in different regions?
I think one of the part of Russia propaganda that it's separate Ukraine to the East and the West. And also I'm like Ukrainian live in this propaganda very long time. But when we talk about East, about Donbass, about Lugansk, Donetsk, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv, Kryvyi Rih region, yes, we have this very long period of history of industrialization when was Soviet period, but it's very important to remember that more 100 years ago, industrialization of this region start by Belgium, France, and USA management, and a lot of company from Belgium, for example, come to Lysychansk, it's Lugansk region, and create this industry. And after this period, when all work was done by people with money, with idea, with experience, communism, and say that before communism, this territory don't have industry. And if you ask a lot of Ukrainian from Donbass, from another region, if they know about this part of history of Ukraine, they say no. Because Russia very powerful in case like rewriting history. And after 2014, I traveling and work in Donetsk region, in Lugansk region a lot, and see this beautiful lands, this beautiful territory, and I'm also understand that in general this territory also don't know about this part of history. And I think also we must remember that a lot of people also in Lugansk and Kharkiv region was killed in Soviet period when Holodomor was in this territory, and Holodomor was managed by USSR regime. So when we talk about why in this territory a lot of people speak in Russian language, it's because a lot of Ukrainian people was killed, and a lot of people from Russia territory was moved to this territory. Yes, and also it's about how totalitarian country do their work and do their propaganda work. Now in Ukrainian army and Ukrainian volunteer, we have a lot of people from Dnipropetrovsk, from Donetsk, from Lugansk, from Kharkiv and other region. Yes, they speak Russian language, and it's very traumatic for me, because for me Russian language it's language of war, on occupation, and for Ukrainian in a lot of cases is language to survive. If you want to survive like physically, like human, you must speak Russian language. So it's not easy. It's not easy all that in Ukraine now we have, but I think step by step we must rethinking history, situation, and of course, for me, every Ukrainian people must know Ukrainian language. And also a lot of my friends who speak Russian now speak Ukrainian. It's about language, yes. So we must do a lot of work, but also when we talk about different of region, I think it's separate to the east and west. It's not true because Ukraine very big country, and in general every region in Ukraine very specific, And we have every region, it's like a different country, I think. We have very different kitchen, we have a lot of tradition and so on and so on. So I think in diversity we have this power also, and freedom. So I think we in progress in the way to find this new conception of Ukraine, and how to live in this territory, in this very big territory, and be together and so on. But the general idea of Ukraine is to be a freedom, yes, and it's also freedom people with the choice, because it's very simple. But when your generation very long time don't have freedom and choice, like in Ukrainian, because also if I ask my international friend about their grandmother, grandfather, and about their father home, they know this history, and sometimes they have family artifacts, family library, and so on and so on. When you ask Ukrainian people about who your grandmother or grand, we don't know. And it's also because every generation was destroyed by Russia in Holodomor, in Chernobyl catastrophe, and in all historian, in Second World, and in all history period, we have this terror from Russia to Ukrainian people. So a lot of challenges and a lot of history that we must reflection. And now we have war, so a lot of work, I think.
That's an interesting story there. I mean, that was one of the most shocking things. Now, my family have a sort of immigrant background from both Ireland and Central Europe. So there's a similar thing there where it's quite difficult to trace past a few generations. And, some people in England will trace their family back generations and generations and generations. But if you've had to sort of move and leave a territory because of war, poverty, disturbances, and so on, you tend to, as you say, get that break with your family history. And it's interesting, isn't it, that the national amnesia about history that Russia tries to impose does have a very direct link to your own sort of family, and the fact that go back a generation or two and the records have been destroyed, or especially under the Soviet Union, people were terrified to talk about what their family did during the Tsarist period, especially if they were landowners or had small farms and employed people, or dare I say even had factories. You couldn't mention these things because you'd be afraid of being put in prison, tortured, etc. What is the role
Yes,
of
yes, I have one little reflection. So, it's why when we have the first period of 5 months of war, and it was very traumatic when international community said that it's don't matter that you can. Okay, one idea was that you can live with the Russia flag, with the Russian in a Russia country, but you save your territory, you save your people, and it does not matter who's the boss. And for Ukrainian, no, because we remember how it's how look like life when you don't have freedom and choice. So it's why for Ukrainian it's very important to win this war, and flag, it's very important, and we know how to live in totalitarian regime, and maybe it's why it's sometimes very difficult to communicate with international community, because in general after Second War Europe have very peaceful life, and for Ukrainian after Second War it's not peaceful life, it's also totalitarian regime. So I think we have very different background, and sometimes we don't understand each other.
And of course, many people don't listen to Poles. Poland had the same experience of occupation. The Baltic countries, for many decades now, we've had voices telling us what it is like to live under authoritarian regimes. They've been patiently explaining to us how Russia destroys, cultural elites, political elites, how they try to wipe out anybody who has a brain, who can offer some kind of resistance or alternative vision. So absolutely. Now, what's the role of your museum, the Territory of Terror? Because it did look at occupation under the Nazis and the Soviet Union, but there's a lot more to talk about. And in the context of the current war, there's the occupation of the Eastern Territories and Crimea. So what do you think is the purpose of your museum in keeping those historic memories alive? And how is it going to reflect these new periods of occupation and oppression?
Yes, well, it's a very important question because, of course, we memorial museum and the general idea is focus on the Nazi and communist regime in Lviv because we located in territory of Lvivsky ghetto and prison 25. But of course, every museum in Ukraine and my museum now in the war, and we do a lot of projects about new war in Ukraine, in documentation and in documentation field and in field to create new collection. We have networking with Ukrainian army, so a lot of artifacts come to Museum Territory of Terror and so on and so on. But also we try to explain this continuum of evil, that this evil start long time ago, and we don't have criminal process of communist regime, and it's from my perspective, it's why Russia now says that we are USSR and also continue on this regime. Yes, but in the new in the new period. So also we talk about Ukrainian resistance and solidarity, because in my museum, Territory of Terror, we have a lot of story how Ukrainian people survive in prison, in war condition, and when they was moved from Lviv to Russia territory to the prison and so on and so on, how they survive, how they caring about the people, and of course how the people be together and strong in war, in totalitarian regime, and how they stay human. Also we have a lot of story about Ukrainian who saving Jewish people in Lviv, because Lviv have this very tragic page of history about Holocaust. Yes, and we want to share people how to stay human when you sometimes don't have choice, because totalitarian regime, when you under totalitarian regime, you not have choice. And we show that every generation in Ukraine, like my generation now, have this experience to be attacked by Russia. So we continue and work like memorial museum, but also we try to share this history when the story beginning. It's sometimes it's very hard, and a lot of people who come to museum in books of comments write that thank you that you show this perspective, because in general we have in Ukrainian this Soviet model of regime, of Soviet model of museum, when you have only victory, 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 victory in Second World. You have bad Nazi and good Soviet people. And in general, unfortunately, Ukrainian museums have this conception, but also Ukrainian museum now on the way to reorganize their exposition and conception and so on. And Museum Territory of Terror, we don't have a lot of museum like this, when you can come and see history perspective from the people side, not from the politic side, when you have only good Soviet people and bad Nazi people. So yeah, sometimes this is very hard, but we try to do this dialogue, and a lot of events in Museum Territory of Terror, it's now with the local community, also with Crimean Tatar community, and with community of veterans, and also they come and do their events, memorial events, and so on and so on. So we in contact with the people who now in Lviv, because a lot of people was moved to Lviv, and continue and do this memorial work.
Now, I don't like ending, and normally I wouldn't end an interview with someone in Ukraine asking them about Russia, but I think in this case, it's an important question. Your museum is directly addressing the impacts of terror and repression. It's examining the crimes of the past, because that gives people strength to protect their identities and to innovate, actually, their identities by examining the truths of the past. Russia had a period where some of that examination was happening in the 1990s. There were documentaries, there were programs, there were discussions. But through the 2000s, all of this history, discussion, examination has been placed back in a box and sealed. And instead of an objective sort of examination of the horrors of the past and the crimes of the Soviet Union, we now have a new propaganda narrative. We have gone back to this idea of, victories and very simple ideas, and crimes are labeled as non-crimes, in a very Orwell, 1984 Orwellian kind of fashion, is one of the reasons why Russia is attacking Ukraine, because it has failed to examine the crimes and horrors in its own past.
Oh, I think for Russia, Russia like do war, and for it's, I think, part of Russia philosophy to organize a war, kill people, and have fun. I'm sorry, but for me, it's look like this, and this is empire, and empire philosophy is occupied, destroyed, stolen, and build territory. I don't know that they have some reflection about this experience of repression and so on and so on. So Russia also on the way to better life, or to be this country of terrorism and terrorism like philosophy. But also for me it's very important that in Ukraine we know this, but sometimes I think world don't take seriously this regime, and I think it's very dangerous to don't take seriously all that Russia do in Ukraine, because when if Russia can do this in Ukraine, Russia can do this everywhere.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And even though, the Western press loves to, sometimes exaggerate certain things. So Memorial in Russia and the closure of Memorial got a lot of media attention, a huge amount of media attention. We must remember that within Russia, that organization is not known by everybody, and perhaps it's a fairly niche thing. And in fact, even now, there isn't a single substantial monument to the terror. There isn't a single museum that focuses on the terror that's open. There's no shrines, churches, monuments, sculptures. There's nothing to remind people of that sort of poisonous and toxic past. And if you don't think about it, you're always at risk, aren't you, of repeating history?
Yes, yes. But now in Ukraine, we must understanding how we can manage situation in Ukraine, and of course, um, thinking about future, about rebuilding, and uh, and survive, and save every Ukrainian people and every Ukrainian monuments, every Ukrainian museums. Yes, because we're under attack. But I hope in Russia sometimes maybe change, but
You're
I
not
don't know.
optimistic. No.
Russia people must management change by their hands.
Absolutely. Well, let's end on a question about Ukraine because it is appropriate to do so. How important is the role of not just the museums like the ones you're managing, but also culture as a whole? How important will that be to future resilience of Ukraine? Because I'm assuming Ukraine is going to be victorious. I believe strongly that you'll get all your territories back. But those will then need to be defended against future Russian aggression. So how important is culture, museums, and innovating the Ukrainian identity as part of that resistance to the aggression of your neighbor?
I think now we must focus to save all that we have, because we lost a lot, and we continue lost. Also, we must focus on documentation of crimes, and have materials for future tribunal, materials of destroying culture infrastructure, museum, and killed people who work in culture sector. And I think it's in the future will be very a part of this tribunal. And of course, we must dreaming about renovation, about rebuilding, because if we lost this big dream, uh, we can lost hope. And sometimes we joke in Ukraine that with hope you can do everything. Let's start do without hope. Um, so yes, and also important to back all of artifacts which Russia stolen, also from Kherson region, from Melitopol, from Kherson, from Mariupol, and share this heritage to the world. I hope that a lot of people who help in Ukraine, who volunteer in Ukraine, come to Ukraine. But also we must read book about world history, because very long time Ukraine was occupied by Russia and have only Russia perspective of world history. And also now when I'm traveling a lot, sometimes I understand that I don't know a lot of nuance of history. So it's time to open Ukraine for the world, and also it's time to open for Ukrainian people a lot of world diversity. So we in progress, and culture in this process, it's the best communicator and the best way to find hope, to find future, to find dream, and to find, of course, peace.
Well, Ola, thank you so much for speaking to me today. It's been absolutely enlightening. I hope on my next trip I get to visit your museum. I didn't have the chance last week, but I would very much like to view that, and especially some of the expositions that you're putting on. I wish you luck in your incredibly important work. I'm very grateful to you for the time to speak to us this morning.
Thank you, and I hope next time see you in Lviv, in Ukraine, in museum.